Huh. Could you make a video about fantasy skin tones? I really struggle with different colored skin tones. Yeah, we can do that. So to kind of play off last week's video, and I've had a few people who have asked me this over the years, and so I think it's about time that I answer, what do I do when I'm getting ready to paint a miniature? Now this is a bit more on top of than what we covered last week, and this is simply to show you guys that I have a dedicated workspace now. And although it hasn't always been that way, my materials never really get put away. I put my paints up against the backdrop there that you can see so I can see what colors are available to me. Colors that I'm currently working with actively on projects are out on the table, and that's how I kind of keep organized so that when I'm working on multiple projects I know what's going on. But honestly, when it comes to just various projects, there are a few things that I recommend. Number one is an X-Acto knife. Number two is a pair of pliers. And number three, whatever plastic glues or cements or super glues that you decide you're going to need to work on a project. Let's take a second to talk about paintbrushes. Now, I like numerous different kinds of paintbrushes, but you don't have to use the exact sizes that I use. Typically you want about a size 0 brush. I like to have 2 by different brands because they end up being slightly different sizes from one another, and then a 10-0 or a 5-0. Now the bigger the number on top of the 0, the smaller the brush is going to be. You can get a good idea of about what size brush you're looking for based on what I use. What I'm mainly using those for is my details. I like my chisel head brushes for dry brushing. You may decide that you want a larger brush for applying things like washes and base coats. For these, my biggest one here is a size 10 and the smaller one is a size 6. A while back I did a video comparing super cheap brushes as well as brushes that you can buy on Wish for using as detail brushes. My personal opinion, again just to reiterate, is that if you buy a pack of cheap brushes and you get one good brush out of it, a single good brush is probably worth about $10. So if you spend less than $5 on a pack of brushes and you get one good brush out of it or more, you've already made your value back. And you can always use those less desirable brushes to do other work like concentrated dry brushing, using them for washes, other things like that, so they're not just junk brushes that have to be thrown away. Now it's also important to keep in mind that when working with a miniature, especially if we're wanting to take advantage of base tones, we want to consider how we're priming our model. Now on screen I've just primed them with a generic gray primer, and then I'm going to be using my airbrush to lay in some blacks and some whites to kind of take that up to what we call a zenithal highlight. So when it comes to miniature painting, a lot of times when we think of zenithal highlighting, a lot of people just think of your light source being from directly above. But in a lot of cases, your light source can actually be from a lot of different places. It can be from directly above, it can be from the side, like I'm being side lit right now, it can be from the opposite side, which is my overhead lights, or you can have a combination of lights. If you take a look at the example that I've provided, you can kind of see how I have zenithally primed that miniature for my Age of Sigmar army, where I've done a lot of coats from above, but I've also kind of done this luminescent all around. The reason for that is that I plan on this character looking like she's giving off her own light source as well as being lit from the sky above. So I kind of want to give this feeling that there's an internal light source. And these are the things you have to think about when we start putting shadows on, but we're going to keep things simple for today, and we're just going to be focusing on light sources from one location. With one miniature, we're going to be focusing with the light source kind of being above and behind, the other from one side where the other side is cast in shadow, and from the other we want him front lit as if there's a light source down near the ground or perhaps directly in front of him. The reason we're doing this is so that we can keep in mind just how much our priming actually plays a role when it comes to our base tones, as long as we keep our coats of paint nice and light. Now, although I'm using an airbrush, you can get this exact same thing going on by painting with thin layers of paint. Just remember to thin your paints appropriately and put on nice thin coats. This may require you to do 1 or 2 coats to get a nice even coat throughout, but you can achieve this by not using an airbrush and doing this traditionally by hand. Now you could all do this with just a spray paint can when you're priming, but I don't have any black spray paint at the moment, so I'm just using my airbrush to lay in all of the shadows. As you can see, I'm focusing toward the bottom of the miniature for this particular one, as I want him to be appearing as though he's lit from above. But just keep that in mind when you're laying in all of your highlights and your shadows when you do this, when you prime, and just kind of keep in mind where you want all of your shadows to end up. Like you saw at the beginning of this video, we're going to be doing 3 skin tones today. We're going to be doing a purple, we're going to be doing a green, and we're going to be doing a red. Now we'll be starting with the red right now, and then we'll cover the rest as we go, and we're starting off with Mephiston Red. Here you can see me adding some airbrush thinner to the Mephiston Red, which is going to make up our base tone for our red skin tones. Now I'm going to be adding some glaze medium, and basically all this does is it helps to thin out the paint without it going super thin. I highly recommend this if you're struggling to kind of thin out your paints just using water. Now the trick, if you're not familiar with using an airbrush, you want to have your paints roughly the consistency of milk, and basically what that means is it needs to be able to stick to the surface of the inside of the color cup, but not just run down the surface like water would. You want just enough tack for it to stick. Here you can see me taking advantage of those priming layers by putting on these nice thin layers of the Mephiston Red. Now something to keep in mind that our next step is going to be, so we don't have to go with complete coverage on the back, is we're going to be adding some highlights. Now how do we do this? Well, I want Bugman's Glow to be my most extreme highlight. It's a bit of a pinkish red. So in order to do this, we end up mixing Bugman's Glow and the Mephiston Red 50-50. Now if we go back to last week's video, you'll know that I talked about the rule of thirds when it comes to how to go up in stages, how to go up in colors, how to pick your highlights. So we've got our base tone, our Mephiston Red, we've got our mid tone, which is the 2 combined together, and then we've got our high tone, our highlight, which is the Bugman's Glow by itself, which we'll apply later. Right now I know on camera it's really difficult to see the mix between the 2 combined together and our original base tone of Mephiston Red, but that is because the model is still wet, and as it dries it becomes more obvious to see that difference. It'll also be more apparent once we start applying our highlights later on. In an attempt to save some time here, I've gone ahead and I've used Moot Green to base tone over our priming for the second model. This is for our green figure, our green skinned character. Now I'm going to be using Athonian Camo Shade, which is a wash through my airbrush. You could apply this by brush, it doesn't have to be with an airbrush. I'm just doing this to save time. And this is to go ahead and add more shadows into the figure and reinforce where I want my shadows to end up. Moving on to our third character, we're basing them in Xerius Purple, and then we're using Screamer Pink as our highlight tone. That's what you can see me applying now. You want to only put this Screamer Pink because it is a base tone. It has a lot of pigments in it. You want to only put it where you want your highlights. Any splash over is going to be a little harder to hide later on, as it's a very distinct color, as you can see it on the miniature quite well, even on this camera. So now is the time where we want to start reinforcing shadows. In my case, I'm going to be using Carroburg Crimson to reinforce all the shadows on the red figure. Once things had dried, I just really wasn't happy with where things had ended up, and I wanted to reinforce those shadows. So if you're not happy with what you've got, take one of your base tones and use that in a watered down sense, almost to a wash-like consistency, and use that to reinforce your shadows. We're also going to be using that to reinforce the shadows on the highlights here in just a moment. So just like I said here, you can see I'm using a really nice fine tip brush, and I'm reinforcing all those shadows with that Carroburg Crimson that we used just beforehand here. We're really focusing on anywhere where it would be in shadow down deep inside of the muscle. If you make a mistake and make too thick of a line, you can kind of dab away at it with your finger while it's still wet, and it will help to blend into the surface once it all dries. But just go through, and anywhere where the muscles are, just pick out the muscles by drawing a line down the crease of the muscles. You can do this for all of them. Find an equivalently dark wash. In the case of the purple one, you can use a blue wash like Drakenhof Nightshade, or in the case of the green one, you can actually use something like a Athonian Camo Shade, which we've already used to darken the shadows of the model as is. If that's not enough, you can go back in and you can actually use Nuln Oil or a black wash to kind of almost panel line everything, but try to stick in the similar color schemes to what the model is painted in. In the case of purple, purple's a very dark color, which is why we use blue actually to reinforce those shadows. As long as we're here, let's go ahead and let's pick out the face and add some details into the face. Now you could go darker or you can go brighter. Here I'm going to show an example of going darker. I'm using Screamer Pink from earlier, and it does a good job at adding some color to the face, but it doesn't really do a great job of really picking out all the details, even though it did such a great job of picking out those details on the purple. And that's just because the colors are too close together on the color wheel, which is why it doesn't really work here. But I wanted to show you this so that you understand if you go wrong, it's probably because you've picked colors that are too close together. So you want to use a much brighter color, almost a neon by comparison. In my case, I ended up going all the way up to pink, or in this case the Bugman's Glow Pink from earlier. We want to use that as our most extreme highlight, and we use that to highlight all the muscles as well. Just pick out all those raised areas where the light would be touching those muscles and just go ahead and put a light highlight across all of them, and it'll just really make the model pop between that and those dark recesses that we just shaded with the Carroburg Crimson. Same thing regardless of what skin color you're painting, whether you're doing green, purple, red, whatever colors you're doing, just make sure that you pick that color, that extreme highlight, and just go for it and pick out those muscles and it'll look great. So by taking advantage of the contrast that we can achieve between the light and the dark end of the spectrum for the same colors, meaning all the reds in this case, all the greens, or all the purples, we can really take advantage of showing both lighting sources, and we can show a lot of life in the skin and really help to make these creatures look like something that could actually exist, instead of just having these flat one-dimensional paint jobs, which we often find ourselves doing, where we just kind of phone in doing the paint job. I know that I'm very guilty of just kind of phoning in skin tones and just kind of going through the motions and slapping skin tones on, but as you can see here, when you really focus on skin tones, you can get some really beautiful and wild variations in those skin tones that just look great and really make the model come alive. At the end of today, this wasn't just a learning experience for you guys, it was a learning experience for me. I used to paint like this all the time, and like I've said before, I got into this habit of just kind of phoning in the paint job, and when I got to skin tones, I just kind of went through the motions and did the bare minimum to make the model look good. And sometimes we have to do that. We don't have the time to finish off the model the way that we want to, and that's okay. Things like this just tend to happen sometimes, and it's unfortunate. But it's really nice to be able to go back in and reteach ourselves skills that we know that we aren't practicing, because if we've learned anything through our hobbies, trust me, if you don't practice something, you're gonna forget how to do it. So today was a really good day for me to kind of relearn how to do skin tones and how to really make a model pop. And I really hope to go forward today and on my models going forward, put a little bit more time into those skin tones to really make the models look spectacular. Hopefully you guys agree with today's video and you actually learned something and you thought this was an interesting video to say the very least. If you really like the video, please hit the like button, because it does actually help to boost us in the algorithm. For every person who hits the like or even the dislike button, it actually puts us out there for about 3 to 5 other people to see the video, and it's a really great free way for you to help us boost our numbers and to kind of get out there and to let the community see us. Also, if you're really interested in what I'm doing and you like my videos, you can also just share me around with your friends that are also involved with the hobby, and that's really awesome. It really helps us out a lot. As always, there's a lot of really great ways that you can support this channel, not just through non-monetary means, but if you have the monetary ability to and you would like to help support this channel in a monetary fashion, there's a lot of great ways in my link tree, as always, in the description. There is an Amazon wish list there if you want to buy something for the channel. There's always paints, tools, models, all kinds of cool stuff that we are going to use for videos in the future, and anybody who buys something from that will get a free shout out, because it's the very least I can do to thank you for helping to provide for this channel and to help us give more content going forward. But as always, I don't really expect any of that stuff. As you guys can always see by the pile of shame behind me, I have plenty of stuff to keep this channel going for a long time to come. It's just if you want to do that. So I really appreciate all the love and support that you guys have shown me, not just here, but also on other social media. And as always, I hope that your display case is always full and your pile of shame never runs empty. Until next time, guys.